Hi, Jürgen, you are waiting.
Hello, Jürgen. Thanks for joining. I already introduced you as our first speaker, so it's an honor for me to hand over to you to give your talk on AI versus COVID.
Thank you very much, Günther. Can you hear me?
Yes. Connections.
And now let me try to share that screen such that we can see something. Can you see my slides now?
Currently not. Yes, now it's coming up.
Excellent, yes.
Perfect.
Okay, and can you also see me or only the slides now?
Yeah, we can also see you. That's good.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me for that. And what you see here, that's a cartoon that I made recently for my overview website on AI against COVID. And down there, you have the link if you are interested in that. And just a few days ago, I gave a keynote at the GMIC conference in Beijing, which is huge, which was about this topic. And the organizers tell me that 2 million people have seen that. So I'm not sure whether we can break that record today. I'm just going to condense everything into a few minutes. And if you get bored, you would just switch it off. We already had lots of excellent ELLIS presentations, so I won't say many new things. AI based on neural networks can help to fight COVID in many different ways. And the basic principle is always the same. You use these deep neural networks to learn, to detect patterns in viruses, and the behavior of the virus and the behavior of humans, of patients, of populations, and you would try to predict future events given certain actions that you might execute, and then you act to minimize damage or minimize predicted damage. And one way of doing that, of course, that is maybe the obvious thing, which everybody is doing, has been doing for months now. You can track populations through pattern recognition. And many of you know the peer-to-peer Bluetooth app on your smartphone, which may prevent potentially dangerous contacts. And not so much AI is needed for that. And it becomes more challenging to recognize faces and gaits of people and their contacts in videos. But for that, you can use these deep networks that everybody has been using for 10 years, at least now, actually longer than that, but they have really become popular about 10 years ago. And one of the milestones was really what my former postdoc, Dan Jirijan, did back then in 2010, 2011, when he created the first deep learning networks that really were able to win pattern recognition competitions. And then he and the team, they won 4 pattern recognition competitions in a row between 2011 and mid-2012. And that stuff can be used for all the population tracking mechanisms that are now widely used, especially in China, but also in Western countries. And then you have the more interesting task, at least in my point of view. You can use deep learning and artificial neural networks to monitor patients and to monitor their heart rates and their cuffs and their biodata, their biosignals in many different ways, and again that can yield approaches to fighting COVID. If you want to get references on that, then just look at my little website, which has a whole list of interesting references. By no means complete, but not so bad. And when Dan Jirijan and the team did that stuff 10 years ago or so, computers were still 100 times slower than today. And compute was 100 times more expensive than today, which means that today we can do 100 times as much for the same price. And neural networks can be used to predict outbreaks of diseases or of spreading of the virus in the population, and they can be used to build early warning systems. And there is a COVID-19 forecasting challenge on that. And neural networks can learn to predict future demand for limited resources, such as ventilators and doctors, to optimize the logistics. And you might want to call that predictive maintenance of the population. Predictive maintenance of the population. Yeah, you can sequence virus genomes, and there have been, there was at least one talk about that here at the ELLIS conference, and you can detect their cities of origin because they are mutating all the time, these genomes, and then you can learn the patterns and the mutations and can predict new outbreaks. And you can predict where is this particular type of virus going to emerge again next, and you can act to minimize damage as always. Yeah, lots of stuff can be done. You can use neural networks to analyze X-ray images of lungs and to detect pathologies, and all of that has been done. And it also goes back a long time. Again, Dan Girijan, my brilliant Romanian postdoc here in Switzerland, he was able to win with the team in 2012 for the first time a medical imaging competition, again, at a time when computers were about 100 times more expensive than today, maybe 70 times more expensive than today. So today we can do 70 times as much for the same price. And back then it was new. So back then people used other techniques to scan human tissue for pathologies. In that case, it was about cancer detection. But today, everybody's doing that, and Google and IBM and Siemens and everybody is using that approach to detect pathologies. You can use the same thing for almost any kind of medical imaging. Yeah. What I think is really interesting is that you can use these networks to automate drug design. And the team of Sepp Hochreiter and Günter Glambauer and the other guys in Linz is really strong at that. And already in 2007, Sepp Hochreiter, my former student, of whom I'm really proud, he had a system that was able to predict the folding of proteins. So you probably know that the virus has a bunch of proteins, not so many. It's a pretty simple virus, and they fold in a certain way. And depending on how these proteins fold, you can figure out where you can dock counter agents on the virus. And that was already done in 2007 when computers were about 1,000 times, almost 1,000 times slower than today. LSTM, long short-term memory, was used back then by Sepp and his team for doing that. And recently, DeepMind also had a system which looked at the sequence genomes of proteins of the virus and used it to predict the folding patterns. And there's a database on that. And maybe you know that the first DeepMinders with publications in artificial intelligence and PhDs in computer science really came here from my lab in Switzerland. So this long short-term memory, which I already mentioned, maybe you already have used it, but probably not for protein folding. You know it from your smartphones. That's where it's doing much of the AI. And if you don't know it, I can't really mention the details of how it works, but at least I can mention the brilliant students and postdocs who made it possible, starting first of all with my former student, Sepp Hochreiter. Already in 1991, he had fundamental insights in his diploma thesis, and then Felix Geers, already in my Swiss lab, who had important contributions, and Alex Graves, who improved it also in many ways, also in terms of the error functions that you use to train the thing. And now it's doing all the speech recognition for Google. Whenever you use your smartphone and you say, okay, Google, what is the shortest way to the station? Then it understands what you're saying and translates that into a query for the search engine. And the same LSTM is also has been used in 2016 to revolutionize translation from one language to another. And soon Facebook was doing that about 30 billion times a week for translating 30 billion messages a week through LSTM like that. And it's really nice to see that stuff like that can also be used to do, for example, natural language processing in the fight against COVID. So there's another Kaggle challenge where the goal is to scan the literature and find from the literature, much of this bulk of literature is kind of almost lost or hidden behind walls in the past, and now how can you data mine all these informations, all the information that is in there to find therapies and better molecules for the fight against COVID. So that's one of the challenges, the Kaggle challenges that is going on, and stuff like natural language processing is really significant there. What I'm most excited about is that you can teach neural networks to become chemists, artificial chemists that learn from lots of examples to figure out how chemistry works. So maybe you have a big database. Bayer is one of the companies that has a huge database of reactions where you get input ingredients and then you get output substances as a consequence given certain conditions such as certain catalyzers, certain temperatures, and so on. And the network learns to model this reaction, and it learns to model many other reactions, and over time it learns to understand and to predict how chemistry works. And then you can take the network and run it backwards, and you can say, let's now have a desired output substance which has properties that we have never seen before in any substance like that. And you can calculate backwards and say, what kind of ingredients do I need given this model of chemistry such that I can cheaply produce such an output substance that has this quality. And this approach has really revolutionized and is currently revolutionizing chemistry, and the jaws of engineers dropped when they saw how greatly the development time for new chemical substances with desired properties and new drugs, how much that can be accelerated. The neural networks in the past already learned to win chemical learned competitions about chemical understanding. The Merck Molecular Activity Challenge was won by the University of Toronto already in 2012. And the team in Linz won the TOX 21, was it called the TOX 21 challenge? Something like that. Was it called the TOX 21? Yeah, I think so. Where the goal was to predict the toxicity of substances, and again, an application where AI and deep learning really can greatly contribute to medicine. Neural networks can design new molecules, or can help to shorten the time needed to design new molecules and to decrease the number of trials that you need to come up with promising candidates. For example, there's a famous paper by Segler and colleagues from 2018. And what you also can do is you can find the antibody needle in an antibody repertoire haystack. And this was again done by the University of Linz in the team of Günter Klammbauer and Sepp Hochreiter. And Linz is really strong. They have lots of applications in that domain. So the typical drug discovery pipeline goes like that. You need 6 years or more to select just a few out of 10,000 compounds, chemical compounds, and then you need many years of clinical trials, maybe 7 years of clinical trials, and then you need still 1 or 2 years of approval finally. And this is way too long for this fight against COVID, where we need a fast way of using machine learning for improving the situation. But it is possible to do that, and one can speed the whole process up through virtual screening. What is now really important also in context of this JEDI competition, you take a large chemical database such as the zinc database, and Günther talked about that in a previous ELLIS workshop, I think in the first or the second one. And the zinc database contains about 1 billion descriptions of different molecules. And then you would take a SMILES LSTM, that's what the University of Linz has developed there. And you pipe the data through that SMILES LSTM to suggest about only 30,000 top scoring molecules as SARS-CoV-2 inhibitors. And that works really well. You take just the few suggested things and test those in the wet lab, and you do the assays for that, and that can greatly reduce the time that you need for the drug discovery process. So the JEDI challenge, which started just a few days or weeks ago, I think on 10th of April or something like that, is about that. You can win up to 2 million euros if you have the best performance there. The JEDI initiative calls itself the European Moonshot Factory, and that's one of the first moonshots that they are financing. Well, most of what I've said so far is about supervised learning, imitating nature and chemistry, predicting what patients do or what is going to happen to patients given the data from the patients and so on. I'm always keen to point out that we also have systems that are not just slavishly imitating teachers, human teachers, but that invent actively their own experiments in an unsupervised fashion, such that they set themselves their own goals to figure out how the world works and what you can do within this world, and how you can solve self-invented problems in this world. And then over time, as the repertoire of solvable problems becomes larger and larger, the system can also, at least in many situations, also speed up the performance when it comes to learning tasks that are given by outside forces, by humans, for example. However, that at the moment is probably too, that's not fast enough for finding a quick solution to the COVID-19 crisis, which needs a fast response. And so I just want to mention that. One final thing, maybe many people are asking, how is COVID-19 going to affect the economy? And I should know, because we have a startup called Nascence, which is affected by that. Nascence is pronounced like nascence, like birth in English, but spelled in a different way, and N for neural networks and AI for artificial intelligence, because it is about the birth of a general purpose AI, which learns through curiosity and other techniques, all the stuff that it doesn't know yet, and then quickly can learn a new thing given what it has learned so far. Now, our clients are affected by the corona crisis. All the major companies in the world are affected. However, as the Chinese know well, every crisis is also an opportunity, and we strongly believe that large parts of the industry are going to emerge in a stronger way out of that crisis. Many industries are currently shocked into digitalization, which on the surface expresses itself through heavy use of things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all these things. But on a deeper level, there is now this growing incentive to solve all kinds of problems which needed lots of human work, better and faster and cheaper through smarter and smarter machines of the types that Nascence is producing. Let me finally state that I think that AI is not going to be dominated by a few big companies. No, it's going to be many, many small companies and big companies that are going to profit. And most importantly, it's going to be everybody in the population who is going to profit. AI is for all. It's getting cheaper all the time. Every 5 years, compute is getting 10 times cheaper. So within 30 years, we have a factor of 1 million, and it doesn't look like this trend is going to break. The trend has held since 1941, when Konrad Zuse built the first program controlled computer, which could compute maybe 1 elementary operation per second, and now 30 years later, you could compute roughly 30, or you could compute 1 million operations per second for the same price. And then shortly after that, 30 years later, you could compute 1 million instructions per second and so on. And today it's about 1 million billion instructions per second. So a large LSTM of today, which is, has been used for translation, for example, has maybe 1 billion parameters, 1 billion connections. And if you compare that to your own brain has about 1 million billion connections. So it's about a factor million bigger. Nevertheless, a factor of 1 million is just 30 years. And the whole thing is going to become cheap and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, just like with mobile phones. I remember once I had a rich friend, 40 years ago, I had a rich friend, and he owned a Porsche. And the most exciting thing was that in the Porsche, there was a mobile phone. So he could pick up the phone and he could talk to anybody who also had a Porsche like that. And today, a few decades later, there are billions of people who have mobile phones that are much better than what he had in his Porsche. And they can do much more with their smartphones than he was able to do. And the same is going to happen to AI. Many, many people are going to have many different AIs, making their lives easier and healthier and happier. Let me come to my final slide, which is not so much about technology, but more about the geopolitics of the coronavirus. 100 years ago, the Spanish flu emerged, not from Spain, but from North America, apparently from Kansas. And more recently, the Chinese flu, the coronavirus emerged apparently from Wuhan. And if we look further back in history, we'll find many cases where the rise and the fall of empires went hand in hand with viruses and germs and diseases. And maybe the most extreme example of them all is not the current one, and it's not the Spanish flu of 100 years ago. No, maybe the most extreme example is the one that happened 500 years ago, when the Europeans discovered or rediscovered and then invaded the Americas. And back then, there existed only about 500 million people on this planet, 500 million. And 60 million of them lived in the Americas. And apparently almost all of them, 56 million of them, died through the diseases which the Europeans brought, the germs and the viruses that they brought, against which they had no resistance. That was maybe the most extreme case of unconscious biological warfare ever. If you scale it up to the current population numbers, then this would be equivalent to the death of 1 billion different people. So in many ways, the current situation is far less extreme than it used to be back then. And I think what we have seen at this workshop in many talks is that there are many ways of using deep neural networks and artificial intelligence to improve the situation against COVID. If you want to see more, please have a look at my little web pages. And for now, I'm thanking you for your patience.